Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to episode 73 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the front porch.
So, Lenny, it's March.
Yes.
When I think of March, I think of two things. One, your birthday month.
Mm-hmm.
The Ides of March are coming up.
Yes, well, that is my... And I applied for Social Security today.
No, seriously.
I did. 62 is going to be a good year.
Okay. The other thing that March is known for is being a very windy month.
I know. And I love wind. It's my favorite thing.
Well, that makes sense. Wow.
It does make sense. I've always loved the wind. I love sailing. I love the wind. I just love the wind.
You should live in Nebraska. We have a lot of wind in Nebraska.
Yes, you do have a lot of wind. It just rolls over the prairie and doesn't stop.
That's exactly right. They have stories of the pioneers who settled Nebraska who went crazy because of the unrelenting wind.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I would like it.
Yeah, I think you probably would. Speaking of wind, it's the perfect month for our book, The Shadow of the Wind.
Good segue. This book is by Carlos Ruiz Zafon, and it was published in 1988. So this is the oldest book we've selected for our book club.
Yeah.
The Shadow of the Wind was originally written in Spanish and was translated into English in 2004. There are 3 sequels to the book. They are The Angel's Game, The Prisoner of Heaven, and The Labyrinth of the Spirits. The author died at 55 in 2020, and the novel has sold millions of copies worldwide.
This is, I think, the first book that we've reviewed that the author is no longer living. So we definitely will not be able to have the author on, but we do have a great guest lined up that we'll talk about at the end of the podcast.
Okay, that sounds good, Nance.
So the book was originally written in Spanish. Did you read it in the original Spanish, Lenny?
No, I did not. I read it in the original Kindle.
The English translation, huh?
Yes.
You did take Spanish in high school.
That did not really help me, Nance. I'm sorry, it really did not.
Did I tell you that my son for Christmas got me a cookbook that's a French cookbook, a famous French chef? It's available in English, but he said, "You're doing so well on Duolingo that I got the French edition for you. So that will help you practice your French as well."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is that a challenge?
It is a little bit of a challenge, but I've been looking through it and I think I'll do okay. There are a couple, I believe, keywords that I'm not familiar with, but it'll be easy to look those up. I think I'll be able to do it.
I think that's pretty neat that he did that.
Yeah.
Now, I have found that Google Translator is really helpful.
There you go.
Do you use Google Translator?
Yeah. Do you use that at work sometimes?
I just figured it out.
Yeah.
For the Red Cross, I had a client I was working with and they were Spanish speaking. So I just put in what I wanted to say and Google Translator, and then the client responded, and then I put it back into Google Translator and we were talking. It was fantastic. I love it.
That is great.
So then I'm like, why was I always struggling with this before? So I'm going to do that from now on.
Excellent. Well, okay. So we've established we read the book in the English translation. I did not read it in the French translation.
No? Okay.
No. So this book is sort of a gothic mystery. It's also a thriller. It takes place in Barcelona, which I always want to pronounce as Barcelona, which I believe is how the people in Barcelona pronounce their city.
Oh.
So it starts right after the end of World War II, and we meet 11-year-old Daniel Semperi, who is grieving his mother's death. His father decides it's time to take him to a secret library called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. First-time visitors to this secret library select a book that they pledge that they will not allow to die. Daniel finds a book called The Shadow of the Wind, so the name of this novel, but the author is Julian Carax. The book and a mysterious man's quest to destroy every copy of Julian's work plunges young Daniel into a 10-year odyssey of love, murder, and revenge.
Ooh. So Daniel picks up the book, and then this story becomes like a story within a story, because we learn about the book's author and then his whole backstory from childhood on up. So there's a lot of characters in here.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of history, like way before Daniel's time. And then Daniel gets older and reaches adulthood during it. So there's a lot of parallels. The story's very deep. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
We could talk for hours about this book, Nance. This is going to be hard to pare down.
There is a lot going on. Very complicated plot as a result.
Yeah. Now, have you ever read a book that was kind of like a book within a book like this one is?
Mm-hmm.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This one was unique in some ways in terms of the construction. But Daisy Jones and the Six is a fairly contemporary book. I think that was just published a couple years ago by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And in that story, a daughter is conducting interviews to find out why a fictitious band called Daisy Jones and the Six broke up, kind of based on like a Fleetwood Mac kind of era band. There's The Elegance of the Hedgehog, which I liked very much. Same kind of conceit. I don't know if you remember The Princess Bride, the movie. It was also a novel. And that's a grandfather reading a story to his grandson. And they kind of frame the story. There's The Plot, which also is a newer novel out by Jean Hand Corlitz. And in that story, we're learning simultaneously about the author of a novel and his student's life. And then, of course, there are a lot of older stories like Wuthering Heights, and that's framed by, I believe, a housekeeper who tells that story. 1001 Nights, or the Arabian Nights, also is the story of Scheherazade telling a story so that she won't be murdered by the king. But this is a little different because it's, like you said, there are these parallel tracks. So in a way, it's a fractal story. And there aren't as many of those. You might remember The Never-Ending Story. That was also a movie and a novel. And that was a little bit of a fractal story with the idea that this is a story that never ends, that it is always being repeated over and over again. But just reading like the New York Times book review and other book reviews, it seems like these kinds of books are becoming more and more popular. There are so many book descriptions that are like present day archaeologist finds an artifact in his grandmother's belongings, mysterious artifact, and goes on a hunt to find out the mystery of this artifact. And then in doing so, this impacts that first character's life in multiple ways. Now, I completely just made up that plot, but I read so many book descriptions that are that concept of person finds something, goes back to discover the true story of XYZ, and it ends up paralleling or impacting that first person's life.
I wonder if he is partly a founder to that kind of writing then, since this book is such a well-read book.
Yeah, I do wonder if maybe he helped repopularize that idea. And I think people do find them very enjoyable to read because they become a puzzle in a way. They're the story, but then they're also the mystery of this person's life. So you get engaged in the person who's pursuing the mystery, that person's life. You also get interested in the mystery of the person's life who the character is trying to puzzle out.
Right. And then I was trying to figure out, how does this come together? And the author is very clever about just giving you a tidbit at a time.
Right.
And then it was about 2/3 through it, I was like, it's coming together for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm starting to see the parallels and the story here. Well, let's get this talking about some of the parts of the story. The characters are real well defined. There's a lot going on. But the book opens up And Daniel's a young lad here, and he's running around Barcelona. He's spending time outside of his home now. He's old enough to run around.
Right.
And understanding females is part of his trying to figure things out. To me, when I read this story, even before it gets to be murder and kind of dark, it is sort of one of those coming to age books for me. Like, I'm a young person, I'm on the cusp of becoming a teenager, and I'm starting to spread my wings, and I've got my little boys with me, at least in the one story. And we're all going to grow up together, and this is how our lives are going to be. So for me, it was interesting hearing you say it's kind of a mystery. It's kind of dark. It's kind of a love story. It's kind of all these things because so much happens. But to me, it seemed like a coming of age book. And I'm wondering what lens you were reading when you were looking at this book.
I agree. I think it really is very much a coming of age because it's not only Daniel's coming of age, it's also Julian's coming of age. It's also Fumero's coming of age. There are so many characters that we meet, and the pivotal time in their life is that time when they are on the cusp of young manhood and trying to figure out what they are going to do based on the situations that they face. I wonder if the author was almost playing with the idea of a young boy who has a great imagination, and he's almost imagining what a heroic life story for himself would be. Like, he almost imagines the shadow of the wind, and he almost is Julian Carax himself. I mean, this is very meta, and there's nothing in the novel that supports this, except that there are so many parallels between Julian's life and young Daniel's life. And it's almost a young boy's fantasy of great danger, great love, great heroism, great betrayals. And as that unfolds, Julian's life teaches him the path that he decides to go on based on both choices that Julian made that Daniel replicates, and also not replicating some of what Julian did. So yeah, very much coming of age, and just what are you going to make of your life? So definitely agree with you. I thought there was also a real theme of secrecy in this book. It has a very insular feeling. Everyone has a past that they're trying to hide. And most people, we only slowly learn the true story about their past, kind of like layers of onions or a blossom slowly opening up to us. No character is exactly who they seem to be when we first meet them. And I wonder if that's a reflection of the setting. This is just at the end of the Spanish Civil War, and the idea that everyone has secrets about who they were, what they did during the war, and that continues to haunt them. So that was another theme. And then, of course, the theme of true love, following your heart. It's very romantic. That's also a theme as well.
I agree with you. I mean, the secrecy that was some of the behind stories with these folks. The author was real careful of keeping something secret too, I thought. There's a darkness and an evil that is a thread throughout this, which is quite gripping, I think, and how people evolve towards evil, one slippery step at a time. It's very dark, part of it. But, it's the love stories that I really like, Dance.
I do know that you, in general, like love stories. Did you like the love stories the best?
I did. Daniel has that first love, but he's just a boy. There's no way a lady who is 10 years older than him is going to be attracted to a child. But she toys with him.
She totally toys with him. And when you're young and in love, 10-year age difference does not mean anything. It's infatuation is what it is.
It is. But she eggs him on a bit.
She does.
She feels bad about it, as she should.
She's just feeding her own ego.
Yes. But yeah, the love story of Dan, like, I'm glad that he finds somebody else, let's just say. And B sounds fantastic. I love her.
Okay, so question for you. The narrator, because I listened to this in narration, pronounced the name as Bea. Would you pronounce that in?
I believe that it would be in Spanish.
Okay.
Bea. So he talks about Bea. So I loved that. Julian's love story with Penelope. I really liked their little love story. The love story between Fermin Romero de Torres and the housekeeper. I love their love story too.
They're very sweet.
Yes. So there were lots of fun little love stories in there. Even the love story between Julian and Noria, it wasn't really a love story, but I liked their connection because she did love him. So for her, she was in love. So there was a lot of juicy little love stories that I liked that part of it. The evil part, it makes it intriguing. It adds to the mystery. But I love the love story parts.
That's great. I liked Daniel's storyline the best. Now, this is the main storyline, so it's maybe no surprise, but I really felt that was the storyline that held all the others together. Again, you would expect this is the main storyline, but I most was interested in how his story was going to conclude. What was his character arc going to be? How were the panoply of characters going to end up impacting his life, and how would he impact their lives? So his was really my favorite, I think.
As I read it, I didn't see one as being more the major character than the other. In fact, I kind of felt like I got more information from Julian and his whole life and a more rounded picture of who he was. Now, he lived longer. He had decades of information and decades of his personality change and what happened to him. Okay, so Daniel and Julian, they both have their little love stories and they both have their little events that happen in their life. But the ending is so different, Nance. One finds love and a love that lasts. That's Daniel. Julian disintegrates horribly. He is a tragic character. You almost think like Shakespeare. I mean, tragedy over a lost love. His life fizzles out. He has all these hopes and dreams of being a writer. So what differences do you think happened that created two totally different outcomes, Nance?
You're right. They are two totally different outcomes. In Julian's story, love destroys him ultimately. It's his great love for Penelope that he allows to destroy him. Daniel is the lucky character in that his love for Bea helps him thrive. They have a full life. They are able to be together and have a wonderful life together, we learn at the end. So Julian and Penelope are separated just at the time they're about to run off together and find their freedom and find their love. But her mother finds them in bed. Now, you might say, well, this is kind of a old-fashioned prudish story. Sure, the second that they have sex, then they are punished for it. But that's not the story here, because Daniel and Bea also sleep together. So it's not the sex. There's no underlying, you have sex and you will be destroyed kind of theme to this at all. Both the objects of love, Penelope for Julian and Bea for Daniel, true blue loves. They are loved in return fully, as completely as they love these two. They're both daughters of wealthy men. So there are so many parallels, like you started off talking about at the beginning of this episode. For me, it almost feels like just bad luck that Julian and Penelope are discovered and Bea and Daniel are not discovered until later in their relationship, when they are strong enough to be able to declare their love and go against family wishes. So I wonder if it's a story of, well, boy, sometimes you have bad luck. And if you let it, this can impact your whole life. Then there's also the story of evil Fumero, which is funny. In the book, sometimes he is referred to as evil Fumero. So there is no question about this character. And he is the main antagonist, interestingly, to both Daniel and Julian. So he has been an outcast schoolmate of Julian's and who Julian befriended. When he and Julian meet, Fumero is poor. He's being raised by his father, who is the groundskeeper at the private school where Fumero is allowed to go since his father works there. But the boys all make fun of his father. His mother is usually only half dressed. She has the mind of a flea, I think at one point she's described as, and also a character that the boys make fun of. So even as a boy, some of the other schoolmates say that he's not right in the head.
Well, he's killing animals.
He is.
So that's a big red flag. And you have no friends.
We do know that torturing animals is a bad sign.
That's a really bad sign.
Yeah.
Of future things.
Yeah. And his mother climbing into his bed at night and fondling him.
Yeah, that's not good either.
Yeah, that's a bad sign. So in some ways, poor Fumero, I mean, he's just set up for a really difficult trajectory, which he completely leans into and completely fulfills. And then there's Julian, and Julian learns his love-starved mother had a premarital affair, and his actual father is the amoral, wealthy businessman who is Penelope's father. Okay, first of all, question. What did you think of Julian and Penelope being half-siblings? The horror of this is really never mentioned in the book, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, there's a definite creep factor there.
Which is never explored in the book, really.
No. But the father knew.
Oh, yeah.
And the father threw a fit. He let his daughter die.
Yeah.
Give birth to and die right there. Mm-hmm. He was willing to do that and then flee the country.
In that case, it is like a Greek tragedy where you cross a taboo or a societal boundary, even if it's unknown, and terrible things unfold. That's kind of the essence of Greek tragedy.
Yeah, they did here. So that was a surprise. I did not see that one coming.
So then, comparing both Fumero and Julian to Daniel, Daniel's in a completely different situation. His parents loved one another. And in fact, his father never really recovers from her death. Daniel's deep in mourning when we meet him. He's sad that he can no longer remember her face. He comes from a very loving home. So for me, I thought this was interesting how the author set up some really dysfunctional homes to Daniel's loving home, and the idea of the disadvantages of family of origin and how that leads some of these characters to love and then one on to evil. What did you think of that whole kind of family of origin concept?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking of like nature, nurture.
Yeah.
When you look at Fumero too, and you see all these boys being very young, and you see threads of, okay, here are some things to look out for. Here's some, I think, of interventions.
Yeah.
These are some things to be thinking about. These are things to be looking out for. These are some ways someone could help them and mold them and shape them, because we've got some red flags here. With Daniel, he does have a death, and he has a death of a mother.
Yeah.
And this could scar him hugely.
It does scar him, I would say.
Yeah. So there still is that feeling of, which I appreciated in the book, people make their own choices. So yes, you can come into garbage. You can come into, as a young child, growing up, your formative years. There are some things that happen to little kids that are horrible. and horrifying. The death of a mother, a floozy of a mother, people having sex with people they shouldn't be having sex with, But Daniel overcomes his loss, and he overcomes his first love, not being interested in a little boy.
Right.
And he is able to love again. Yes, that pain is there for him. You feel that, that's your first love, so you're always going to be tender there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he can overcome, and probably because of his past, his stable life, he is able to overcome. But when you look at Julian's guy friends, the boys that grow up together in that story, one of them comes from a wealthy family. They all come from these very different families. And each of their individual stories, some of them are more successful and do more than others.
True.
Even Daniel's best friend, where he is growing up, he he grows up and he not really into Daniel being with his sister.
Mm-hmm.
He's not happy with that, but he does grow up and he does find love too. Mm-hmm. But it's just so different the way all these boys grow up to be different people. So Nance, I love that part of it, because you really get these well-defined characters. You really get to see how their early life and their family dynamics affect them as they grow.
Yeah. So who is your favorite character?
Furman.
Okay, why?
Okay. So for people who haven't read the book, this guy starts out in the book as a homeless guy under a bridge.
Yes.
And Daniel befriends him on a cold and damp night. Anyway, they befriend him, they hire him, they clean him up, and turns out he was probably like a spy in the war or something, and has some prison time. I mean, his life is very interesting. But anyway, I liked him. I liked his romance that he had. I thought the book really needed him because there were so many dark and eerie and mysterious parts to it that he gave it some levity.
Yeah.
He's very witty, very comical. He is a loyal friend through and through, through all of the stuff that Daniel's going through. This is a friend who is going to stick by his side. And I loved that about him.
You're right. I hadn't thought of that, but he does provide levity in this story where every character is just struggling under enormous burdens. And not that he's been tortured during the war. He has had burdens, but you're right. He is very comical. He's very funny. He has a very light sense of who he is and how he makes his way into the world. But he also has so much integrity, and he's willing to die for what he believes in.
He's willing to die for Daniel.
Yeah.
He's willing to. I made a promise to the guy in the asylum that I was going to get him a prostitute. By golly, I'm getting him a prostitute. Whether it's easy or not, I'm going to figure out a way to get a prostitute in here. And he does, because it was his word. Daniel, I think, forgets about it.
It was actually Daniel's word. So Furman was making sure that Daniel kept his word.
Yes, you're right. So there's that integrity, the loyalty of what you're saying that really is very striking about this guy. I really liked him. Who was your favorite?
Okay, I would say perhaps a secondary character that we have not mentioned yet, and that's Jacinta. And she is Penelope's nanny, who basically raises her from birth and becomes really sort of like Penelope's mother, because her mother is very distant and has struggles of her own. She's not really that interested in being a mother. Jacinta knows all about Julian and Penelope's love, and she encourages it to the extent that she is hoping that they will find a way to be together, although they know that she won't condone them running off. So they don't tell her about that. But she does look the other way, or she knows when Penelope is going to meet Julian and allows all of that to happen. When Penelope and Julian are discovered, she's dismissed immediately. When she keeps coming back and wanting to see Penelope, they're wealthy and powerful, and they're able to have her committed to the same asylum that you were referring to earlier. And that's where she ends her days. She is the person that Daniel meets who really starts filling in the story about what happened with Julian and Penelope. So I like those initial glimpses into Julian and Penelope too, coming from Jacinta.
Well, what about her personality or character did you find? To say that she is your favorite character is interesting.
I loved maybe some of the same things that you described Furman. She was very loyal to Penelope. She kept her secrets. She loved Penelope, even to the point of allowing herself to be committed to a psychiatric facility. She never forgot that love. And she, was always hoping the best for Penelope and Julian.
Yeah, I thought she was a good nanny, because I think in nanny school, they must teach you when to keep the boys away and when to say, oh, that's a good one.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I'm going to look the other way.
Exactly. So at the end of the book, Daniel and Julian finally meet. So it's these two stories pretty close to the end of the book. We get the awaited, is it going to happen, intersection. Daniel and Julian meet. They both get shot by, again, evil Fumero and his men. Did you think Julian and or Daniel would die at the end of this book?
I thought they were both going to die. And that was the parallel to the
Did
very
you?
end.
Okay.
Absolutely. It wasn't even near the end of the book. It was at some point I realized, wait a second. Julian, I think, is going to die. Oh no. Is Daniel going to die too? I don't remember what part of it that I was reading about that, but I was like, oh no, this isn't going to end the way I want it to. I want Daniel to live. Mm-hmm. At what point did you realize that the man who had the burns was Julian?
I think I was maybe about halfway through the book.
Okay.
When I started thinking, yeah, that man, somehow that is going to be Julian.
Yeah. Again, just a little bit at a time.
Mm-hmm. The book definitely foreshadows that Daniel will die. So I totally get that you were like, oh no, Daniel can't die, because somewhere, again, near the end of the book, he says, in 1 week, I will be dead, or something like that.
That's what it said.
Yeah.
That's why I thought that. Yes. Yeah. So I'm thinking they're both going to be dead.
Right.
And I didn't want that to happen.
Maybe foreshadowing understates.
Okay. Yes, I did say that.
And when the book said that, I didn't believe it.
Why?
First of all, where is this character talking from? Heaven? Like, how is he's addressing us from the afterlife?
Okay.
That didn't feel like the tone of the book. I also really hoped that it wasn't going to happen. So there was that. And then I just thought, that's a terrible way for this book to end. This book cannot end with our beloved little 11-year-old boy dying at the end.
Well,
because of Julian's sins. I mean, what kind of book is that?
I don't know. You had me reading all sorts of weird books, so I didn't.
Not true.
I thought anything is possible.
Fair. Okay, so now what you said made me think that you did not believe at the end of the book when Daniel says he is visited in his hospital room by Julian, and then he says something to Bea later, and the hospital nurses are like, no, there was no one here visiting you, but he's sure there was, and the pen is gone.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. This book had so much action. Oh, yeah. I think that was Julian. Did you?
Oh, totally.
Okay. So they both did survive.
I think they both survived. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I wanted to ask you about the house.
The Aldaya mansion?
Yes. The house almost is a character, I think.
Yeah.
for them to both be dead in this house where one has Penelope's in the basement and the son, there's actually a crypt down there.
Yeah.
And there's all this killing going on in the house. And this house is dying. It's being taken over. It's run down. Nobody is taking care of it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you think of the house as being a character?
Yeah, it's a great setting. That's kind of what made me feel like this is a sort of a gothic horror, a creaky old house that sort of symbolizes in this book, I think, the death of a certain kind of aristocracy, even.
Yeah.
Like there are so many of those rich boys that went to Julian's school, their families ended up disintegrating economically and otherwise.
Right. From the war or time
Exactly.
or whatever.
Right. Or Miguel.
Decisions. Yeah.
Decisions. Miguel hated that his father's money came from warmongering. And so he made it a point to give away and fritter away all of the wealth. So it's like the passing of an era of what Spain was and the strictures and the social mores, specifically these families, specifically this house, all passing away. And then when we get to the epilogue at the end of the story, now it's an advertising agency.
It's been reborn.
That's right. I mean, talk about old ways being passed. And now it's just like, some consumeristic advertising agency. And no one remembers the Aldayas, who were a premier family of Spain.
Right.
And so all of the things that kept Julian and Penelope apart, again, aside from the fact that they were half siblings, real problem there, they all pass away. Like none of it matters. 30 years later, no one remembers. It's all gone. And yet there was this tragedy.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be really interesting to talk to our guest next episode and learn a little bit more about this era in Spain's history, which I feel like I don't know a whole lot about.
Right. And really the significance of this house and how this house almost has a personality because it's beautiful at the beginning.
Yeah.
It is the house of this family.
Yeah.
And it has a name. It's prestigious. The other thing that made me think of what would you call like a tragedy is that was it Fumero that kind of gets stabbed onto, what is it? The hand of God or something?
Impaled by the angel's sword.
Oh, yeah. So
it's poetic and symbolic for sure.
Yeah, there's this evil and good and that kind of part of it too.
Yeah.
Oh, next time when we meet, I would love to ask our guest about the house and this time in history, because quite honestly, it does cover many decades here.
It does.
And World War I, World War II, that time period, I don't know about you, but I didn't learn anything about Spain in those times. It was all about what was going on in Germany and England.
Yeah.
And the United States and Japan. There wasn't anything about Spain or Portugal.
No, I've read one or two books set in the time of the Spanish Civil War, but they didn't go deep into what was happening politically or economically. So I don't feel like I learned anything from those books either. The only thing I really ever remember learning in school about Spain is that's where Columbus came from. And then I think that's the last mention of Spain in my K-12 education.
Mm-hmm. That probably was about it. Okay. Well, stop by the front porch the next time because we're going to welcome Dr. Sarah Brenes to the front porch to talk more about the shadow of the wind. She is a professor of Spanish at Amherst College, and she is a scholar of World War II era Spain and has written about the impact of the shadow of the wind on shaping Spain's collective historical understanding of that period. What a perfect person to be talking to us.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thrilled that we have her. I think she's going to shed a whole new light on this. I was just trying to keep the characters straight and figure out who's with who and, all of that. But boy, to have someone of her knowledge to be able to give us more insight onto what's really going on in Spain and the society and the secret kind of thing that's going on and all that will be interesting.
Yeah, I think it will be a whole new layer to the book because the book doesn't really talk that much specifically about the economic, political, social climate of Spain. You kind of get some of that through the characters' behaviors,
right?
But much of it is left unsaid. Well, you figure this author was Spanish. He was writing the book for Spanish readers. He didn't need to explain anything.
No, I mean, he knew where all the streets are. Oh, well, now we're down at this street and we're looking at this building. Yeah. You felt like you were there. Like, oh, these are real places. Oh, yeah. Okay, now we're going to take the bus over here and we're doing this. And yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of assumed knowledge that I'll be really interested in learning more about that kind of context that we may have missed.
Oh my goodness, it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be so interesting.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. Our website is frontporchbookclub.com.
Our episodes come out twice a month on the first and third Wednesday of each month.
See you next time, Lenny.
Okay, take care. Did I say his last name wrong?
No, I have no idea.
Oh.
Did I give you a strange look or something?
Oh, yeah, you did.